Some years ago, there was a strike in the UK underground. For 48 hours, most of the transportation system was out of functioning for millions of passengers, which really had to find a new way to work. But over just 2 days, something remarkable happened. A research team discovered that the pendlers on average had saved 6 to 7 minutes to work just by finding alternative ways getting there. Fantastic, you'll think, except for one little detail. As the strike ended, only 5% of the pendlers stayed with their new path, and a surprising 95% went straight back to the default behavior. Now, the world has never been this fast and will never be this slow again. So how does your culture adapt to change, in particular with COVID in mind? Well, Peter Drucker once was quoted saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But did COVID eat culture? You'll find out right now. Hey everyone, welcome to all the viewers across the world and all our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there, like What Got You Here Won't Get You There and Mojo, How to Get It. But beside all those fancy credentials, more important than anything, Marshall is an amazing human being. Hey, Marshall, how are you doing?
Martin, I am always happy to be here, and I've got one new friend and two great old friends on the call. First, I want to introduce my wonderful friend, Martin. Martin is a great human being, the most interesting, a fascinating story. You have to read his books and read his story. He's written some really wonderful books. Ministry of Common Sense, Biology. He's the world's expert on branding. He's also a member of the Thinkers 50, as by the way, is everyone on this call. So Martin, and the other thing about Martin I love is he's a good guy, always willing to help out. He helps me in volunteer projects. He never asks for money. He's always willing to help out for good causes. So Martin, I always honored to be here with you. And a good friend. Thank you.
Marshall, are you sure it's me or someone else called Martin? Because that's really flattering. I love it. I hope you're recording this session right now. Well, listen, hey, everyone, if you have any questions or comments, just post them here or just tell us who you are and where you are. And if you like this show, by the way, don't forget to press the like or the follow button. Now, Charles Darwin were once quoted saying, in times of great change, it's not the strongest or the cleverest that survive, but the ones most adaptable to change. Why have we humans come to conquer the world? Well, the answer could be found in an area of our brain named the anterior cingulate cortex. It's where empathy lives. Because in contrast with any other species on planets, we've developed this region over hundreds and thousands of years, enabling us, I guess, to place our feet in the steps of a polar bear, kind of imagining its intended path of attack. Now, here's the interesting thing. It takes a polar bear 7 generations actually to adopt the change and implement it into its DNA. Humans only need 1 generation before they actually have adopted the change. Now, here comes the scary fact. A study from Norway analyzing the impact of the Second World War and those horrible concentration camps showed that victims were forced to eat and sleep less, adopted and implemented this very behavior into the DNA of the children. The result, the next generation needed less sleep and ate less. What's concerning is that for the first time, studies now are showing that empathy, the very cornerstone of our survival, now is slowly fading away. What's the consequences of us sitting behind these stupid, silly screens? And how do we navigate all this? Well, Marshall, I think you're sitting with the perfect person who can answer that very question.
I would like to introduce my great and wonderful friend, David Ulrich. David, he went to UCLA with me. I don't think either one of us were considered the most likely to succeed in the class. And so David and I are old buddies. We've known each other for years. He is a wonderful human being. He's been ranked #1 leadership thinker in the world, Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame, #1 HR person in the world, author of 20 books, travels around the world. And also, the thing I love about David, just a good human being. I mean, a person with great values, a great family, and I'm honored to know him and consider him to be a wonderful friend.
Marshall, what a delight. And thank you for showing a picture of my younger brother as you showed that video clip. It's fun that we can, in fact, change. I look at that picture and I go, oh my gosh, that's a younger me who is much heavier than I am now. Marshall, it is so good to be with you. I have followed you at UCLA. I follow you on airplanes. I follow you everywhere. Marshall, what a privilege to join you. And Martin, what a privilege to join you. Your work on brand is shaping not just what's interesting. Your work on brand is not just shaping values. It's shaping the right values. If the values inside of a company don't create value in the marketplace, then why are we doing them? And the value of values that is so central to your work is the direction that I think we need to be headed. So Martin, thank you for your work. And I'm excited to work with Morton, whom I don't know as well, but I've read some of his work and look forward to learning with him. Marshall and Martin, thank you.
Hey, question #1. There's a big theme now called the Great Resignation. People looking at this concept of culture, thinking, who am I? What does it mean? Why should I go back to work at all? Give me your thoughts, because I had thought this might be overblown. I've done some research on this. It is truly a big deal today.
Well, first of all, let me say, Martin quoted Peter Drucker as having said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Actually, he never said that. So let me give you advice. If you want a quote that everybody will quote forever, tell them it's from Peter Drucker, Albert Einstein, or Marshall Goldsmith. That way your quote will be quoted forever. But he's right. Marshall, I think this idea of culture gets talked about a lot. It was the word of the year in 2015 in Webster's. The problem we've got with culture in organizations, and it's not new. In 1952, some anthropologists wrote a book with 140 definitions of culture. It's not a new idea. In organizations, culture has evolved. A lot of people think about culture as the roots of the tree. These are our fundamental values. They're what we've done. They're the roots. I think that's an old definition. I believe, following what I just said about Martin's research, culture is the leaves of the tree. Culture is not the values. It's the values that our values create in the marketplace. For example, we were with a company, and one of their primary values was, we want to be the most profitable in our industry. And I said, let me do an exercise. Take that to your best customers. How do they think about that? So they went to a customer and said, our primary value is to be the most profitable in the industry. And the customer said, not so quick. That means you're going to overcharge us every time you can. When we define culture from the outside in, that resignation issue gets lost, because employees want to be a part of something that means something to someone else. And when the culture of a firm is defined from the outside in, as the value that it creates for a customer, employees are more likely to say, I want to join that. That's an agenda I feel passionate about. And so shifting your culture from what are our roots, what are our core values, to how do those values create value for somebody else is a better way to engage your employee.
Dave, I love your comment there. It makes super sense.
Well, that's because I said your book was that's because your book is so good.
Exactly. But don't tell the viewers, please, right? Let's not destroy that illusion. But listen, here's a question for you. I claim that the company cultures all over the world are witnessing an existential crisis right now due to the remote and hybrid work. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes and no. If you define culture as the roots of the tree, when the winds change, the roots may get thrown out. If you define culture as the identity of the firm in the mind of our best customer, then the culture is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. And so the culture begins to adapt based on what the customer does. Let me give an example. We have hybrid work, and we'll talk about that. Morton is the expert, and we'll all learn with him in a few minutes. I think the definition of work boundaries has changed. I think traditionally work was a place. I get up in the morning, I go to work, I am at work, and I go home from work. Well, today, work can be done anywhere. Look at the four of us. We're working in our offices. By the way, welcome to my office. You get to glimpse into my life, and I get to glimpse into your life. So the boundary of work is not a place, but there still is a boundary. The boundary of work, I believe, is tied to your culture. What did you as an employee do today that created value for a customer, either today or in the future? And if I can define that question as the boundary, I go to an employee. We appreciate your good service, your good work. What did you do today that will create value for a customer today or tomorrow? And if the employee can't answer that, then there's a problem. And so I love to think about the new boundary of work as not a place. It's the culture or the identity of the firm or the values that create value for your customer.
I love that. I love that.
By the way, you just saw, for those listening, you just saw a moment that will never happen. Marshall and Martin were speechless for 3 seconds. That is so cool. That is so cool.
And you have it on tape now. Tell me, Dave, who in the future should own culture? Is it HR, or is it the CEO, or is it marketing, or is it the operating function? So who should the right owner be? I know your answer probably is everyone, right? But the reality is, shouldn't someone own it?
The metaphor I like is when you build a house, and Marshall's just moved into a new house, he had an architect. The architect is the designer, the facilitator. The owner is the homeowner. In my view, the owner of culture is ultimately the senior business leader. That could be the CEO. It could be a senior business leader in a business. There are many people who serve as architects. The marketing people serve as architects to define customer expectations. The HR people serve as architects to define organizational implications. And by the way, this idea of culture from the outside in is so fascinating. We've been working with some companies who are doing ad purchases. So I buy a big ad purchase for 5 million, whatever it is, dollars or euros or reals. Now spend 10% of that purchase on your internal leadership training. So we do an ad purchase. We make a series of ads to promise our customers A, B, and C. Now we'll spend 10% of that budget on leadership training so that our leaders act to A, B, and C. So when a firm says, we want to be known as technologically advanced and innovative, that's our identity in the marketplace through our ad budget. Let's do that for leadership training. And when we combine those two, the outside identity and the inside behavior, then the culture is not just the roots of the tree that are static. It's the leaves of the tree that are changing. Again, that's a longer answer than you may have wanted.
And once again, Dave, you will hear silence from our side, right? Okay, coming up, a sneak peek behind the secretive walls at Apple. How do they grow innovation? And how did Apple maintain the culture of innovation during COVID-19? We'll find out right now. So everyone listening and watching, I'm so excited to welcome Morten Hansen. Morten Hansen is a professor at University of California, Berkeley, and a former strategist at Boston Consulting Group. Morten has since 2013 worked for Apple University. And for those of you guys who doesn't know what that is, it's not a place you really go to. It's Apple and their internal university. He's the academic research, has done a lot of it, won a lot of rewards. And by the way, he's also one of the world's most influential management thinkers by Thinkers 50. He is the New York Times bestselling author of several books, including Great by Choice, co-authored by Good to Great author Jim Collins, and his latest, Great at Work. And then, by the way, Morten and I discovered that we actually share the same childhood memories as we were holidaying in Denmark some 40 years ago. Welcome, Morten. I think we look slightly aged since then, but thank you and welcome, right?
You know, it's so great to be here, and being in the presence of 3 esteemed colleagues is just amazing. So I'm in awe. I follow all of your work, Marshall, Martin, Dave, all of you. So it's such a great pleasure to be here today and having this fascinating conversation in a moment of change. I mean, this is really, everything is changing around us in ways we wouldn't have thought about 2 years ago. So for our profession, leadership, management, business is great.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I know you're concerned about the ramification of us going back to work. Why is that?
Well, it's not going to go back to the old paradigm. I think we're going to see some real changes. I mean, you mentioned in the very beginning that 95% of people after the problem in the UK went back to the old habits. And that, of course, is a possibility that we will do so. But this change we've been through offers some really great innovations possibilities for us in the way that we work. More specifically, I hope that a lot of companies will consider this thing we call a hybrid work model. They mention it's not new. No, it isn't new, but it's probably new at the scale at which we're going to see it. What do we mean by that? We mean you will have some days in the office, hopefully together with other colleagues, and then you will have some days on your own, remote or otherwise. For example, Apple has announced that they're going to be 3 days in the office. They're going to be fixed days, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. That's in the news. And then 2 days at home. And many other companies are doing something similar to that. That would be a different model. We can talk about the pluses and minuses of that model. But I think going forward, that's what we're going to see. And you mentioned on the top of this session that there would be, has COVID eaten culture? And my answer is not yet, but it could. Because it's hard. You cannot create and sustain culture for Zoom, not for long. And we've been living off an investments pre-pandemic. We had strong teams that went virtual and they maintained their culture through that time, but probably will erode it if we do another 3 years on Zoom, for example. So culture, whichever definition we adopt, is cultivated through social bonding, seeing each other, being in the hallway, chatting, having lunch together, some physical component to our interactions. And so a hybrid model will enable that, yet provide some flexibility for people. And so I think it's a good model to do that. We cannot be another 3 years on Zoom.
You know, it's very interesting. Dave mentioned something earlier. He said, we've been living in a hybrid workforce for years. Dave, I know your life, I know my life. Our life is a 100% hybrid workforce for the last 40 years at least. I'm now thinking about my role as a leadership coach. And Morten, Morten, what advice do you have for leaders in terms of how you could coach them, help them to be a great leader in this new world, the new hybrid work world?
Marshall, you cannot ask me about coaching. I have to ask you, what are we going to do? I mean, that's not, but there is an interesting part there though. And that is that if you, when in a hybrid work model, what we've done the last 18 months, a leader cannot see the team every day. You don't have those personal interactions where you could drip feed some motivation, some inspiration, some advice. Somebody told me, an executive said, one thing I'm missing is that I can't really give informal feedback to people. We walk out of a meeting and I might drop a few, few sentences about how I think they did in the presentation. Now I have to schedule a follow-up one-on-one. It gets more formal, right? Another Zoom call to say, that presentation yesterday was so-and-so. So that kind of the 2 minutes, 3 minute kind of coaching moments have been much more difficult virtually. So how are you going to maintain that? And I think that how leaders inspire other people is more difficult in a remote work environment because you don't have those informal interactions. And so how do you motivate and inspire people when you're doing more work remotely? It's going to be a real big challenge. I think the solution lies in having a really strong purpose. That is very clear to people. Why does our team exist? What is the contribution we make to customers and society? And that goes kind of closer to definition that Dave was talking about in culture, that a close cousin of culture would be purpose. Because if people sitting at home and working and not having any sort of informal interactions, but they know why they're there, they know why they exist, what they're doing is valuable, that keeps the inspiration going.
Morten, you worked at, and you still work at Apple University, at least for the last 8 years, understanding the essence of creativity and innovation. In fact, just recently you wrote an excellent piece in the Harvard Business Review about your experience developing and maintaining a creative culture at Apple. what did you discover inside those secretive walls, and what can we learn now in this hybrid situation?
Yeah, so I have two jobs. One is at Berkeley and one is at Apple. And we wrote an article in Harvard Business Review. Joel Padoni, the head of Apple University, and myself wrote an article about how Apple is organized for innovation. And one of the things that we talk about in the article is Apple's leadership model. It's really experts leading experts. So you don't have general managers leading big businesses. You, by and large, have experts. They are domain expertise leading the area of expertise. Hardware leading hardware, software leading software, and so on. And but one key, so the Apple is organized functionally, which is very unusual for that size of a company. But what does that mean? It means that if you're going to get anything done, you work across functions. So collaboration becomes key. A key part of how Apple is organized for innovation. So you bring all these diverse experts together, and they have to be able to collaborate. And that's why this kind of in-person collaboration is so important to Apple, as it is for many other creative organizations. And that sort of brings us back to this hybrid model, which is, why would we go into the office? Why should we go into the office? And one answer is, we need to have effective team meetings, debates, sitting around the room, debating, building on one another's ideas, brainstorming, having constructive conflict, disagreeing. All of that's things that you could better do inside a room as opposed to virtually. That's the essence of collaboration at Apple, as it is in some other companies. And you have to do that probably in person in the best way. Hence, you got to be together in the office in the same days to be able to do that. And that's really a part that I think people don't understand is really so important about Apple's organizing for innovation, is that kind of cross-functional collaboration that people, I think, have missed in terms of how that company is run.
Absolutely fascinating. Now we're going to, sorry, you first, Marshall?
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say we will talk even more about Apple in a second, but I think we should just go to a coming up statement, because the majority of business people now set aside 60 to 70 hours a week to make a solid career. Studying more than 12,000 executives, BCG discovered some surprising insight and an equally, I would say, surprising solution to the problem. What that solution is, what we'll try to find out right now, which actually brings me to the very question I know Marshall was about to ask. Marshall?
Well, my question gets back to yours, is the question of why. I just did this session with some of the 100 coach group, and the topic was, what's going on with this great resignation, people quitting, and why. And one woman made a very profound point. She said, COVID has not only made us think about life, it's made us think about death. And when you're in an environment where numbers about death are in front of you every day, you really start focusing on, what is this all about? What does this mean? Why am I here? So just a couple of thoughts from each of you on how has this issue of purpose become more important in the new world? Because I thought that was a very profound comment.
First of all, let me take a shot at that. First, let me just say, Morten, I love your idea about hybrid work. I think what we're going to see more than ever is what I'm calling personalization. Personalization has two parts. One is about the person, the emotion, the empathy, the energy, the experience. Leaders have to care about the person. And hybrid work allows that to occur, both distant and together. It's hard to care in the same way when we're apart from each other. The other part of personalization is the ization. I think we will tailor jobs to the person. I had a call today with somebody who is a manufacturing. You can't do hybrid work when you're building parts and systems around the world. And so I think that hybrid work with the overhang, we're going to personalize the work. What works for you, given your style, your job, and where you work? And Marshall, I love your comment about how do we manage this resignation? When I coach people, and by the way, let me just give everybody some really good advice. If you ever do coaching, look what Marshall's done and steal it. So that's the advice. Now, having said that, when I coach people, I start with the question, what do you want? What is wanted? If you don't know what you want as a leader, somebody will define it for you, probably not in your interest. That's the question. How do you define success? Clayton Christensen, one of our great colleagues who sadly passed away. How do you define your success? And my sense in coaching, that's the first question. What do you want? What defines meaning for you? What defines value for you? By the way, the second question is, who do you serve? Because what you want is narcissistic and self-interested, and those leaders will show up in a negative way. How do I then serve others and help them discover what they want? Good leaders use their power to empower others, their strength to strengthen others. So, Marshall, those are my three comments. One, Morton's idea on hybrid work is great. Think about that as personalization. And then the best test of leadership is to define what you want and to help others define what they want.
Now, Dave, what you're saying makes absolutely sense, right? But here's the challenge. I think it's fair to say that most people I'm talking with right now feel they're working more than ever. It's like every single minute you have is packed with a team call or a Zoom call, right? And I don't need to tell you, it doesn't help that business icons such as Elon Musk, right, claims to work 120 hours a week. I'm not sure how he does it, but that's what he's saying. Is Elon Musk the way to go right now? And how do we break that paradigm? Because I kind of feel it's feeding to everyone. Everyone is pushing more and more towards more and more work, yet we always say at the same time, hey, we shouldn't work that much. What's the thoughts from Morton? What do you think?
Could I ask Morton about that? Morton, would you want everybody to be like Steve Jobs? You know Apple University. I think Elon Musk is the Steve Jobs of our generation. Would you want everybody to be like Steve Jobs? You've lived it. I'm going to let Morton answer this because he's lived in that world directly.
Yeah.
Nobody can be like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. But if I want to put some data on this, in the book Great at Work, we studied 5,000 people and we correlated how they work to their performance as assessed by their bosses. And what we found is really striking, and we're not the only one who found that, by the way, which is that if you look at number of hours work and your work performance, it is actually an inverted U. I mean, the curve goes like up like so, and then it plateaus, and then it actually starts going down, right? So people who work the hardest are not the best performers. There is an optimal number of work. And what that really tells me is it is not about how much you work, it is how you work. It is how you organize your time that matters far more than the hours you put in. Beyond a certain amount, of course. You can't be putting in 30 or 20 hours in a full-time job and expect maximum result. But what we found is that if you are going beyond 55, 60 hours a week, which is a lot, by the way, you are not better off adding another set of hours. So it's how you work that matters. And one thing is having a clear purpose about why you're there, because that motivates you into putting in a really great effort per hour of work. If you think about it, that's what really matters, not sitting and wasting your time browsing the internet while you're working. It's that kind of dedication. It's the idea of flow, being in the flow, and feeling excited about what you do. Then you maximize your output per hour. That's really the key.
You know, Dave, I've known you for years, many years, decades, and I don't think you or I, either one, work at all. I don't feel like I'm working. I'm just having a good time here. I've known you for years. I've never seen you really feeling like you were sacrificing or anything else. As far as I can tell, unless you're a pretty good actor, you've always loved what you do and you don't have to work. You're not doing it for money. So I think a key to this is really getting people to look in the mirror and say, what matters to me in life? And if you're doing what you love, this how many hours that I work is kind of an irrelevant question. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Oh, I would agree with that. In fact, my wife came in this morning and said, what are you doing? And I talked about the agenda, and she said, do you realize you're working as a volunteer? That's a line from Peter Drucker. It's not that we're not being paid, but you're choosing to do this work. And volunteers, I know, Marshall, you and Martin and Morton all volunteer, and you give enormous resources without economics. Why? Because it meets your values. That's why that first question, what do you want? What is wanted? What do you want? And if you know the answer to that, which is purpose, the way Morton, M-O-R-T-E-N, describes it, if you know what you want, work then becomes not a burden. It's not a demand. It's a resource. I find it delightful. And I know, Marshall, you've had this. And I know Martin and Martin, the triple M show, Marshall, Morton, and Martin. I know that when you're teaching or coaching and you see that light go off and somebody's got an idea and it's going to change the way they not only think but behave, boy, is that rewarding. I wish that happened every day. It doesn't happen every day. I think work should be something, again, that gives me energy, that gives me enthusiasm, that gives me excitement. And again, if leaders can use their power to empower others, to help other people discover that in them, then the value that we create as leaders anywhere in the organization creates value for others. And ultimately, in my mind, back to Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N, for the customer. Because
I want to build on that or slightly disagree with that, a caveat to what just been said. The four of us don't have normal jobs. We're very fortunate that we don't have a lot of bosses bossing us around. What I hear a lot from middle managers in particular, or even in small business, they're incoming. There's so much incoming. Hey, over the weekend, could you just look into X? Could you do this? Could you do that? And what happens, and what has happened during the pandemic, if you look at some survey data, is that people are working later hours at night. There's this boundary, 24/7 is kind of happening because you're always virtual. You can always be on. So there's a lot of incoming, and you have to set certain boundaries. I think one of the key things to professional survival and thriving in the next couple of years, and has been the last few, is the professional ability to say no appropriately so, even to your boss. The ability to prioritize and saying no to the right things and yes to the right things. It's so crucial. Otherwise, you cannot focus, and then you get overwhelmed, and you lose that passion and purpose we just talked about.
Morten,
I love that idea.
You're so right.
No, go ahead, Martin.
Well, this is Martin here, M-A-R-T-I-N, talking. So I just want to say, David, I think you guys are both right, actually, in the end of the day, because the reality is that it's a fine balance, right? Do you know what? I did a speech last week. Can you believe it? So I was kind of at work in Zurich, in Switzerland, for Microsoft, and I decided to ask some of my friends at Microsoft to challenge this M&M panel. And here's a challenge from the head of Microsoft in Switzerland, Catherine Henkel.
Hi, I'm Katrin Hinkel, and I'm the General Manager of Microsoft in Switzerland. I would like to know, with all of the leadership discussions, how does technology that becomes so predominant in our workspace and interaction with our customers, interaction with our people, how does that change leadership? I'm really looking forward to your answer.
Okay, so that's the BCG challenge for you guys. I don't know who. Listen, no, Morten, you have worked at BCG.
Morten is working with Apple. Morten,
I love the BCG. I love the BCG Minute. It's my old firm, so it's good to see them again in this way. My answer would be, how does the technology change leadership? Technology enables us to lead in a hybrid model. In other words, we can have a team that is distributed. We can have a team that is working partly remotely. And we cannot do that without technology. I mean, if we didn't even have this technology today that we're sitting and using right now, or Microsoft Teams, or WebEx, or Zoom, it wouldn't work. It would have been terrible. The last 18 months would have been absolutely awful. We've been sitting using phone conferences, that old technology, which was so bad in meeting rooms. So technology has enabled us to interact in ways that we couldn't do before and getting work done. And that means that we're now seeing the emergence of the hybrid model, which we would not have seen before. Now, managers have to be really good at implementing the hybrid model. And there are a few tips I have for that, but it's not easy to do. But provided we can do it, the technology actually enables that to happen.
Dave, do you want to share some views?
Let me agree with that. The technology is an incredible enabler. My PhD is in numerical taxonomy. And if you know what that is, you should get a bonus book. And if you care about what it is, you should get two. Taxonomy is the science of simplicity. So look at algorithms and statistics to make it simple. My simple world is what technology does, and all the innovations that I'm not current around, is provide us digital information. Technology enables leaders to use information to build. At Microsoft, where Catherine is, their CEO talked about a growth mindset. And built on some of that incredible work, how does technology provide information to create a growth mindset? How does it help us connect with each other and get information? Now, on the other side, technology is not a replacement. It's not a replacement, as Morton said so brilliantly, for face-to-face. If we don't have face-to-face interactions with our kids and our families and others, the technology can't replace that. It can't give us the information that we need from those subtleties. But I think technology also takes away some of the burden. In the HR space where I work, there's a lot of administrative processes, payroll, benefits, registration for training. Technology can remove those so that your employees can focus on the areas where they create the most value for the customer. That was my question for Morton, is what is it that we do that is the right thing to do? And I still keep going back. If you can't succeed in your marketplace with customers or investors or communities, there is no workplace. I've consulted for so many companies that had great workplace practices, but they failed in the marketplace. And so where I begin the discussion is where Martin's books are. What do we do to succeed in a marketplace? And how do we turn that into a better workplace? And technology is one of the great enablers, because technology gives us information about a marketplace that we may not have seen before.
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to say one thing, that I think that here's a management challenge, is to use technology the right way. Where do you use it, that interactive technology, and where do you not? And my answer is that when you really need face-to-face meetings or collaboration, that kind of brainstorming, constructive conflict, by the way, that is so important at Apple, as I said, that in-person collaboration, you need to be face-to-face in the office together to do that the best thing. And here's a challenge for managers. When you're asking people to come back from the 18 months or 2 years of remote work, people are then commuting back to the office, and they're going to ask, okay, why are you bringing me into the office? And if I'm sitting in the office and I'm just doing boring work, and I'm sitting in front of my own screen and I'm going to boring meetings, why am I there? What managers need to do is to have productive debate meetings. And that's going to be a challenge for a lot of managers, because before the pandemic, we know a lot of meetings were unproductive. And now you're actually going to, I think it's like high jumping, the bar has gone up. People are going to expect better meetings and more effective debate in those meetings. Here this morning, I'm sitting with my favorite mug, coffee mug, and it has an inscription on it. And it says, I survived another meeting that should have been an email, right? Don't bring people back in the office and having meetings that should have been an email. Have those face-to-face debate meetings and do them really well. That's management challenge number one in this new paradigm of hybrid work.
Let me just put an amen behind that with an idea. Let me put an amen behind that, Martin. I know I'm intruding. I love that idea. And so instead of saying, go back to work, this is Marshall. Don't do feedback, do forward. Let's go forward to a new work. And that's building off Marshall. Don't do feedback, do feed forward. We're not going to go back to work. Let's go forward to a new work. And I think you've just described what that work should be. Is it work that will create value? I love what you just said. It's a great idea.
My only concern is I hope people watching this show are not going to say, well, I survived another M&M show, which should have been an email, right? So listen, guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Listen, Marshall, before we let our beautiful guests go, what are your reflections at this moment?
You know, I'm certainly not an expert on corporations or macro level much of anything. My thoughts are on the micro level. And as I listen, I'm going to look at it two ways. One, I think purpose, meaning is becoming much more important. Companies need to do what they can to create an environment where people are doing what they love. On the other hand, as a Buddhist, I really think people need to, how can I learn to love what I do? How can I do what Dave talked about, create meaning? In almost all jobs, we have the opportunity to serve. How can I serve and really love this process of what I do? If you can't make that work out, okay, leave. Really, though, make the effort on a personal level to make it work out for you.
I think it's time to run the Mule summary now. So I'm going to build on what both guest said, and I'm going to start with Morten, which basically said that in Apple, or at Apple, experts lead experts, which is really fascinating. And one of the things I read in the Harvard Business Review article which Morten wrote was, he said that every expert actually will have to have knowledge 3 layers down. And if they don't have that, then they basically have to accept that someone else is going to make decisions on their behalf. So let me just put that in bracket and plus those 2 things. Now, Morten, I apologize, I'm going to mess up all your theories here, but one of the things I would claim is also coming out of your article is that company values and purpose is what's driving Apple. So really, if you take that times the lead experts and the 3 levels down, that formula combined is giving the cross-functional synergy which Apple have done so remarkably well. And I think this builds very well on the conversation we had right now, that now is a time not to go back to work, but going forward to work. Now, let me just clean the screen one more time and start with another model here, because one of the things I also picked out of the work, which I think you guys have done, is really this. What is the relationship between owning information or being a leader? Well, there's a lot of research coming out of all the studies you refer to back right now. So if we let's do this line here, and on the left we have high expertise, on the right I have low expertise, then I have on the top high in detail, and on the bottom I have low in detail. Now, one of the studies I know you guys did at Apple was that when you take owning, that you own the information you have, and in fact, you're the one running that show, that is 40% at Apple. They actually say that is the essence of what they stand for. And then the next one is really the bottom here, which is teaching. And this is so interesting. They have this kind of teacher-teacher system where you own information and then you go out and teach other people. The next one is in the top right. That is really learning, that you have to find areas where you have to constantly learn. And it's part of the whole model at Apple. That is 30%. Now, here's really what's so surprising about this model and the work these guys have done. There's only a couple of percent left to delegating. And this is the difference between what Apple is doing, where you actually have leaders or experts leading experts, rather than in the other part of the world where you have leaders leading experts. And that's probably the reason why Apple have done so well. So this, I guess, was a quick Mule summary, basically captivating what we talked about today. Now, we have some amazing guests lined up for our future shows. Among other, we have Susan David, we have Erin Meyer, and we have the remarkable top TED speaker, Professor Sophie Curtu-Scott. But next week is no exception of remarkable guests, where we'll have Barry Schwartz, an American psychologist, focusing on the intersection of psychology and economics. He will join us. He is, by the way, the author of a book I'm sure you heard about, which is The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, and one of the top TED performers of all time. Now, here's the interesting thing. We have paired Barry with no other than Max Hawkins, who broke to fame when he decided to run a completely random life. Take a look at this.
Decided, what if I could let the computer decide what part of the world I lived in? And so I wrote a program that figured out every city that it was possible for me to live in, given my budget, and then chose one at random. And every time I would go to a new city, I would do the same sort of stuff I was doing in San Francisco, go to random events, meet random people. And I'd live there for 2 to 3 months, and then ask the computer again for the next location. I did this for 2 years.
Is this guy crazy? Can you think about this? This is crazy, right? Okay, so Barry Schwartz teaming up with Max Hawkins. Next week, it's the 7th of September, 12 o'clock noon Eastern. Thanks, Marshall, as always. Thanks to my dear guest. Bye for now.